Thank you, Chris. We have a lot of people here on the call to answer your questions, a lot of amazing minds and professionals. So if you do have a question, we do ask that you raise your hand. The way you raise your hand is it's a little happy face with a plus button at the bottom of your screen, and that's how you'll raise your hand. This is a question and answer portion, so we will not have a presentation. It is just for questions, so you can pop in and pop out at will. And also, all this will be posted on CivicMic.com. So if you don't want to stay for the whole thing, but you want to go back and hear other people's questions, you will have that opportunity. All right, so if you do have a question, go ahead and raise your hand. I see S. Misra. If I didn't say that right, please correct me. But I do see you're unmuted, so please, if you have a question, go ahead.
No, not at this time. I did attend the previous one earlier in the week, and I was waiting for other questions that people may have.
Okay, great. And were you able to watch the video of
Yes.
the?
Yes.
Oh, perfect, beautiful.
Yes.
All right. Oh, I see Stacy has joined. So I'm going to give my spiel again, Stacy. This is a question and answer period. We do have a lot of professionals, people from the city, people who are on the engineering team, waiting to be asked and answer your questions. So if you do have a question, please use the reaction button, which is the smiley face with the plus button at the bottom of your screen, and we can unmute you to talk, or you can unmute yourself actually to talk.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So does anybody have any questions? Oh, I see somebody, I see a caller too. If you are a caller and you would like to ask a question and you don't have access to that reaction button, you can just unmute yourself at an adequate time, and we can answer any questions that you have.
If no one else has a question, I'd like to ask Roxanne about the beautiful flower that is her picture there on her Zoom, because that's really, really pretty.
Oh, that is a dragon fruit flower that I grew, and I took pictures of it as it bloomed, because it only blooms for a short period of time, like within a certain amount of hours. And then it starts producing the fruit. So that's what that is.
Thank you for that.
It's a dragon fruit.
It's beautiful.
Thank you. You know, I do have a question. I didn't make the last couple of meetings, and I was just wanting to know, you know, the Proposition 218 passes. What is the total assessment amount for the Rolling Hills area in the engineer's report? Was that like is that going to be $900? Eventually we'll tier up to that on a yearly basis, if I understood the.
So each parcel will have a different assessment amount based on its particular characteristics. Are you asking about your specific parcel, or are you wanting information about the budget as a whole?
No, it was like, I guess it was my particular parcel, but I had clicked on some others and it had indicated the same thing, like it was going to be 300, then another 300. And then eventually it was going to mature to like 900. And I was wondering, is that the one-time assessment eventually to pay off the loan, or is that going to be ongoing on top of our current?
So I think I can answer that question.
Okay.
I'm going to share my screen, another screen, so that I can get to the part where you're talking about. So I'm going into CivicMic.com in the city of Fairfield.
Okay.
And so this is the web map that
Right.
you are speaking of. Let's let it load. All right, and so we go into Rolling Hills
Mm-hmm.
and we click on a parcel. I'm going to click on a random parcel. And so what you're saying right here is like this 300, 300, 776 right here. Is that what you're speaking of? Perfect.
Right.
Okay, so this right here is what your levy is at right now, what your assessment is, what you're paying right now on your property tax roll. And so this is what it would go to, this or this number right here is what this parcel would go to if the assessment is
approved.
Yes, if the district is approved. And so it's not a gradual thing. This is what it would be on the tax roll, the for 42324.
Okay.
Yes, and then there is a and then Sarah, if you can just touch base on the 3% or the CPI, that would be wonderful.
Okay.
Yeah, so the assessment under the new district does have a provision wherein the annual assessment rate would have the ability to increase by CPI up to a maximum of 3%. And so that's really just to make sure that the district assessments or the revenue that it brings in are able to keep up with the costs as costs increase for the services over time, which is of course kind of how we got in the situation in the first place. So so it would increase over time, but it would jump from what the existing assessment is that you're paying today under the existing assessment district to that new amount, and then increase only up to that maximum of 3% on an annual basis thereafter if it's approved.
Okay.
Just to clarify, Sarah, so that 3% though, it's not like a 3% every year, correct? Or it could be?
It could be 3% each year. Yeah, up to 3% on an annual basis. Yeah, so just like your regular property tax, the value that you're taxed on increases by 2% each year. This would have the ability to increase by up to 3% a year.
Thank you, Sarah.
Could you expand on that? Like if the reserves hit the minimum level and what takes away from reserves, like, you know, some deferred maintenance?
Sure, no problem. So what Carol's referring to is that in the budget, in the engineer's report on page 23, we have a line item called reserves at 5% for landscaping, landscape and street trees. Then we also have another line item for reserves of 5% of the street lighting costs. So essentially about 10% of the total budget will be put away in reserves for any sort of capital improvement projects, any emergency work that will take place in the district. And while we don't have a set number yet for what those reserves should be, there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, because it is going to go towards capital replacement, we need to actually have a capital replacement plan in place so we know how much we need to collect and by when. That way we can actually replace those capital items as we go along. Of course, right now we're starting from zero, so it's likely that we will collect that full reserve amount each year until we hit the amount we need to replace those capital items, or at least 10 to 15% of the total budget. The total operating budget for the district. So, but once we hit that comfortable reserve number and we have enough to replace capital reserves, then we will stop collecting for that line item, which will of course reduce the maximum rate that the district, you know, could collect under this new district. It would reduce that, and so, you know, essentially the assessment rates will go down, or the assessment levies for each parcel will go down based on us not needing that reserve line item. And I guess while I'm on that, Additionally, if any line item comes in, actual costs for any line item or actual projected costs for any one fiscal year is below this maximum amount shown on page 23, of course, increased by the CPI each year. If we don't need the money, essentially, we won't be levying for it, is essentially how this budget is going to be working.
Yeah, that's a good point, Chris. I'll just add to that. Hi, everyone. I think most of you hopefully are aware we have a new landscape contractor out in Rolling Hills. TerraCare has been doing some good work out there, a lot better work than our previous contractor, which we had to terminate. As we move forward, and the current contract with TerraCare only goes through June 30. Is that correct, Chris? Yeah. I think there is a provision in there to extend the contract and renegotiate it. But either way, going forward, our intent is to engage with other landscape contractors who are interested in doing business with the city. And so, to Chris's point, if in the case of the landscape maintenance contracts, we're going to look for the best price available, whether it be from TerraCare or a competitor that can provide the same level of service. And if that cost comes in, lower than our budgeted, then we wouldn't have to levy the highest assessment, the full assessment, max assessment in future years.
And just a question in regards to the reserves. When are the reserves going to be, what I mean by protected, only can be touched? They can't be used for any other type of city funds or projects.
Absolutely.
Building the, okay.
Sorry, yeah, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you answered it.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. All revenues and expenses are accounted for in its own separate fund for each landscaping and lighting maintenance district, and that's by law. And it's audited each year. So yeah, definitely it's only used for the purposes of the landscaping and lighting maintenance district for which it was collected.
Good. Thank you for that. And then CPI in regards to what are the indicators that you're going to use? I mean, we know inflation is going haywire now. So, but what is it? And I'm sorry, I didn't read the report. So if it's stipulated in there, just didn't go that deep a dive. But what are you going to use in regards to CPI indicators to know you're going to have to apply that 3%?
Yeah. So, and sorry, do you want to take that one?
Oh, I mean, go ahead. We are looking actually at CPI. So we will be looking at the that particular metric, but we're capping that at the 3%, meaning that the amount cannot increase any more than 3%. So right now, obviously, inflation is a little higher, and we're seeing rates above the 3%. So 3% would be the highest amount of increase that you would see. If CPI is 1%, like it was just a few short years ago, then we would be using that the 1%.
Good answer. I'm just checking.
No, we very much appreciate the questions. Thank you, Roxanne. All right, so I do see a few new people have joined, so I am gonna restate that if you would like to ask a question, you can raise your hand. In order to raise your hand, there's a little happy face with a plus sign. It's the reaction button, and you can use that to raise your hand. This is a question and answer meeting, or so we are just here to answer your questions and listen to you. So we definitely ask that you be respectful, but please feel free to raise your hand and ask your question. And again, if you're on the phone and cannot raise your hand, you can just simply unmute yourself. Carol, I see your hand up. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Well, obviously we don't see how many people are on here, and it would be nice to know how much the people who are on this call are aware of, the 218 process or or what the assessment is, or did they see, and are they on CivicMic? That, I think that would be kind of interesting to know.
So I definitely won't put anybody on the spot to answer, but we do suggest that you are signed up for civicmic.com/Fairfield. If you are not, we highly suggest that you go and sign up. You will get a lot of important information. And if you do not feel comfortable speaking up, you can email email me at contact@civicmic.com, and we can get your question answered through there. And then Carol, sorry, you asked for one more thing. Oh, about the basics of the Prop 218. Yeah, we can definitely. I can definitely ask some questions about the basics of the 218. Do you have any specific that you want, Carol?
Well, what I'm hearing from my neighbors is, what is this? And you explained it many times before about the 1996, and maybe it's a good thing. And I know Sam and I have heard it, but I don't know who else is here. So, like,
Yeah.
what happened? What are we doing? Why are we doing this? Why does it need a vote? There you go.
I think in the beginning, Carol, you asked how many residents were on. I count 7. I don't know if I see everything, Michelle.
Yes, 7 at this time. All right. So I think that we can definitely break down the process. Let's see. So Sarah, if you can maybe just go over the basics of what the Prop 218 is, and why we are forming, or why the city is trying to form a new district instead of just raising the rates.
Yeah, absolutely. So in 1996, voters in California approved an initiative that was placed on the ballot as Proposition 218, and that amended California's constitution to add Article 13D. And in that Article 13D, and then subsequently adopted implementation statutes to Proposition 218, that outlines the process under which we now have to operate related to assessment districts. And so if there were assessments that were in place prior to Proposition 218, there were kind of different rules to live by at that point. And now that we're in our post-Prop 218 world, we do have all of these new requirements. So the engineer's report that has been prepared, the fact that we are separating general and special benefit and allocating special benefit proportionately is all governed by that Proposition 218 law, as is the ballot proceeding. So we will be conducting an assessment ballot proceeding in order to gauge whether we have a majority protest or not. And if not, we then can move forward, and the city council can consider a resolution forming the assessment district. But that ballot proceeding is a little different than your normal vote for president or senators or any other like a parcel tax measure or something like that. It is a ballot proceeding wherein property owners have the right to submit an assessment ballot, but it does not go to registered voters. So if you don't own property in the district, you are not eligible to cast a ballot. And those ballots are weighted by the assessment amount on each ballot. So that dollar obligation, meaning if I have a parcel whose assessment is $100 and Michelle has a parcel whose assessment is $200, her ballot is actually worth twice as much as mine in the weighting process because she's paying twice as much. And so when we tabulate those ballots, we do count up all of the ballots returned. We count add up all the assessment amounts for those ballots in opposition, and we add up all of the assessment amounts for those ballots in favor. If the amount in opposition is greater than the amount in favor, we have a majority protest, and we do not have, we are not able to form the assessment district. If the opposite is true, if the in favor amount is greater than the in opposition amount, that's when the city council would have the opportunity to consider that resolution forming the district.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. And Carol, did that adequately answer your question?
Well, yeah, I think that starts it. And I think that, because I'm just assuming not all the people on here are as informed as some. I think you should go into, exactly how much we have been paying and what's happened and why the landscaping was declining, and why this is so badly needed in Rolling Hills. And the CPI inflator was not ever installed for 30 years into this district. So whoever wants that ball, I think you can't repeat it enough.
So first of all, I do want to mention that the city is neutral on the way people cast their ballot. We are not in favor or against. And so definitely keeping a neutral position, but definitely I can hand this over to Chris.
Thank you, Michelle. So the existing district called LLMD No. 7 Rolling Hills was created or established in the late 80s. Oh, there we go. Thank you for that slide. Was established in the late 80s, and the maximum assessment rate was established at $250 per parcel in the Surplus Ranch area and $300 per parcel in all remaining areas throughout the district. In 1999, this district, a Prop 218 vote was put to this district because even at that time, it was projected that these rates wouldn't support full services in this district for very much longer. But in 1999, unfortunately, the property owners in the district at that time voted down increasing the assessment rates, and therefore the rates remained at the $250 and $300 per parcel rate ever since then. The district got kind of lucky, I think, because it's taken until now, until 2021 really is when we started seeing the problems, that those rates were no longer able to sufficiently provide the level of maintenance services that the residents have been used to for the last couple decades. For a while there was even some ability, the district had some ability to tuck away some reserves. So for the last, I would say maybe 5-ish years, the district has been dipping into those reserves to be able to sustain services. But unfortunately, that's obviously not a sustainable model, right? We want to be able to bring in those new revenues and not rely on those reserves to provide services. So in fiscal year 21-22, it finally came to a head, and the expenses exceeded not only the assessment revenues that were available to the district, but also the reserve amounts that were available to the district. So the city issued the district a loan of about $410,000 to be able to keep those services up through fiscal year 22-23, while the city did the community engagement process, which is what we're doing right now. Yeah, thank you. There you go. There's that chart showing the dipping into those reserves there. So the city issued a loan to be able to carry services through fiscal year 22-23, and now to solve the issue of having expenses higher than the available assessment revenues, what the city is proposing and leaving up to the voters is whether or not the property owners would like to form a new district. This new district will have, of course, higher assessment rates. It will also include, as Sarah, I think, mentioned earlier, assessment rates that are subject to a CPI increase not to exceed 3% each year. That way we can keep up with rising costs over time. This district also includes the reserves, the reserve budget to be able to tuck away for a rainy day, also replace capital items, trees, other landscaping throughout the area. So that's kind of that's the short history of where we're at, the loan and why this new district is being proposed today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chris, for that. All right. So I know we've given a little bit more context. So a lot of times context brings up new questions. Does anybody have a question? All right. Oh,
I have a question.
thank you. And I'm so sorry, what was your name?
Diana?
Hi, Diana.
Hi.
Go ahead and ask.
So I was just curious why the decision was made to go by lot size and not just keep everyone the same in an area, or go by your, I don't know, the actual distance that your yard abuts the sidewalk that would need to be maintained. Why did they choose lot size?
The factors that go into your assessment calculation include lot size, building size, and land use as it relates to your average daily trips. And the reason that we use multiple factors is so that we need to be able to relate all property in the district to each other. And there are multiple land uses within the district. And then so in order to do that, we need to figure out a way that we can compare all of them to each other. So that is the methodology that we use. And that methodology is based in not specifically in the language of Proposition 218, because that law is not prescriptive telling us how to make these calculations, but it is instructive as to what the requirements are. However, there have been multiple lawsuits and legal cases around the assessment provisions in Proposition 218. And so we take guidance from those provisions in that case law in order to calculate the assessment. So we're recognizing that again, all the parcels don't have the same size, the same characteristics. Some are much larger, much smaller, commercial or residential or what have you, a variety of land uses. And so when it comes to figuring out how much each house or property should pay for the improvements in a certain area, we're using the formula that accounts for all of those different things. We do that again relative to guidance that we're seeing in some of the case law that has come out over the years around the assessments.
Okay, can I ask one more question, or do you need to go back to other people to see if they have a question?
No, you can go ahead and ask your second question.
Okay, so I was surprised that mine has gone up more than, well, it's gone up 3.5 times what it was before. I was very surprised by that, because that Hillborn Road, when I moved here, was 1 lane each way, and pretty much you lived in this neighborhood and you were the only people using that road. And now, of course, it's the freeway bypass, and it's so many businesses, and there's a school there, and parks, and many other things are going on. So I was surprised that public use type things didn't end up covering more of the cost than it seems like it has, for mine to have gone up 3.5 times what it was this year.
We can talk just for a moment about the overall general benefit calculation, which does take into account the traffic along Hillborn. What we're doing is a weighted average. So we're looking at the percentage of pass-through traffic on each of the major roadways within the district. And then we're looking at what share of the improvements are located along each of those major roadways, and then creating a weighted average that is then calculated into our general benefit percentage. That general benefit percentage is then applied to the budget for each of the improvements, so that that share of cost relative to those improvements is actually paid by the general benefit contribution that is made by the city, and not residents or property owners, I should say, in the assessment district.
Great, thank you. And then Chris, maybe you can touch a little bit on the budget. And just talking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or did they answer?
Really
Did that answer your question, or did you have a further question?
Can you hear me?
Yes, so we can hear
Oh.
you.
Yes, okay. I guess I'm sure if I go back and read, when all this first started, I read everything thoroughly, and then as it kept coming and kept coming, I have to admit that I kind of quit reading it all. So I'm not up on the answer to this question, and it's probably in all of the information that is out there if I read it. But maybe if you could put it in a nutshell for me, what percentage has the Fairfield general use cost coverage gone up, and what percentage has gone up based on I don't know, just so many of the businesses that have come in to this Hillborn Road area in the past 20 years, 25, 30 years, whatever it's been.
So the general benefit percentage overall is the roughly 24% that you see on the screen. So that's the share of the overall cost that is being paid for through contributions, city contributions for that general benefit component. I mean, we're not comparing right now, we're not looking at what the overall development status of this district is versus what the development status would have been, you know, as you mentioned, say 20 years ago, but we are recognizing all of the property in the district in terms of the various land uses and so forth, and they are all being assessed. So that's, you know, single family, multifamily, commercial, et cetera. Including public property, are allocated their proportionate share of the special assessment.
Michelle, I think you're muted.
Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate that. I was just saying that Chris, do you know if we have that percentage laid out of how much is you know, business compared to residential? If not, that is something that Diane, we can definitely look into and respond to at a later time.
Yes, thank you, Michelle. I don't have that information readily available, but if we could, I think we made a post about that for like Rancho Solano and North Cordelia. We can probably just do the same thing. I think it would answer the question maybe for this district.
Yeah, and I think the question is, yeah, the question is definitely a little different. As Diane, I'm understanding is you're asking what the percentage of the cost would be, correct?
I guess I'm asking when these fees were originally taxes, I don't know, whatever you want to call them. What are we calling them?
Assessments.
Assessments. Okay. When these assessments were initially placed on the tax bills at $300, I'm assuming that the vast majority of that was covered by the residents of the area because there wasn't really anything else here. And now that there is so much other use along Hillborn, I'm wondering what percentage was in the original assessment for the residents versus other uses, and what percentage is in the assessment that you've just created. What percentage is residents versus everything else?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have that information because I think the only other land use area, well, in those areas would be public property. I think there's commercial property in there versus like residential homes, if that's what you're saying. So what percentage was taken care of by that? I don't have what the commercial property was, you know, for the last 30 years, basically. I do know that in recent years, the city was contributing $35,000 as a contribution to the district Now, at the time the district was established, it was under a different set of laws, and Sarah can probably speak a little bit more about that. It's pre-Prop 218 laws, which basically did not require the city to be assessed, nor provide a general benefit contribution based off of this special versus general benefit methodology that we now have to use post 1996. So at this time, what I can say for certain is that the city was contributing $35,000. The commercial properties have also been assessed over these last, few decades. But I just don't have the percentage of what each parcel type represents, commercial properties versus city versus residential. I don't have that at my fingertips at the moment.
But we can definitely get that, and we will post it on civicmic.com. We're going to release a Q&A for any questions that we were unable to answer, and we will definitely get that information. Are you signed up for civicmic.com? You don't have to answer, but if you are not, we do highly recommend that you do sign up so that you can get those notifications.
Yes, I am signed up, and I guess it seems to me that that's kind of a crucial piece of information, because if part of what you're doing is bringing in the general use classification as part of the assessment, if you don't know what it was before, then how do you know that you have raised it an appropriate percentage?
We're not raising the assessment amounts by a particular percentage. We are literally reevaluating the entire district, starting with what improvements are being maintained, which parcels benefit from those improvements, and then, reevaluating the whole thing. So, I mean, while we can show you on CivicMic what each parcel was assessed previously, and even in the current year, the evaluation that started this process to write the engineer's report for the new assessment was really a ground up effort as required by Proposition 218.
Did that clarify something somewhat for you?
I understand that you've just created an entirely new assessment. I guess it's still not answering my question of why mine has gone up 3.5 times what it was this year. If I don't have a frame of reference to know how much more is being considered for the general, what do you call it? I'm sorry,
The general benefit.
General benefit. Yes. Yeah, because it seems to me that the general benefit has gone way up compared to where it was in this initial assessment, but my personal benefit has not gone way up. In fact, if anything, it's probably gone down because there's so much other use on the road and people are throwing garbage all the time that our neighborhood now picks up. My benefit has not gone up. I understand that the cost of my regular benefit has gone way up in the past 30 years. I do understand that. But I don't know that it's gone up 3.5 times from last year to next year. You know what I mean?
Yes. So Chris, maybe you can go over a little bit of that history about kind of why we're in this position.
Sure,
No,
no
I
problem.
understand why. I'm sorry. I understand why we're in this position, and I wholeheartedly agree that we need to have a little bit more added every year. All of that makes sense to me. I'm just really surprised that from last year where it was $300 to next year where it's $999, I'm just surprised that it has gone up that much, because it seems to me that a greater bulk of the improvement, a greater bulk of the cost of maintaining the area should be borne by the city or whoever is responsible for the general.
The general benefit. Okay. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. And I am going to let Chris just give a little bit of that background, because I do feel like it might clear up a little bit, maybe not maybe not to your exact satisfaction, but it will give it a little bit of an explanation. So Chris, go ahead and do that.
Yeah, no problem. So as mentioned, the original district was formed prior to Proposition 218. And back when this district was formed, the law allowed the assessments to be set on an equal basis. So basically everybody got an equal share of the costs. After Proposition 218, now costs have to be spread according to special benefit received. And that's the methodology that Sarah was talking about earlier. So while it might not necessarily, the previous assessments weren't using the same methodology and wasn't necessarily honing in on the exact special benefit that you were receiving, because that's just what the cities and the state of California had as a law in place at that time. Now with Proposition 218, we have to be much more granular, much more specific on how much special benefit each parcel is receiving. And so again, it's not that your special benefit necessarily increased from last year to this year, but what it is that this methodology and what cities are required to demonstrate is the amount of special benefit that each parcel is receiving. And therefore we have to use a methodology that comes to that arrives at that number. And that's how your assessment is increasing. But on top of that, so is the budget. So whereas previously, I think I mentioned that, and maybe I didn't mention this, assessments in the existing Rolling Hills district only total about $300,000 per year. So basically the city right now can only collect $300,000 from the Rolling Hills district. The proposed budget for this district, as I told you, the costs have been kind of going up and we've been dipping into those reserves. The proposed budget for this district to provide adequate servicing, to be able to build back up those reserves, to have a contingency budget to maintain the trees properly, not just walkway clearances, but full pruning on a regular 3-year cycle. That budget is now a little over $1 million. So that has actually tripled. Not that that's a direct correlation to why your assessment has tripled, but just to show you that we have to now allocate costs, a larger amount of costs based on this new methodology to all the property owners. And that kind of all ties into why it has increased from this year to the next.
And Chris, I'm going to mention only because I know that the city has mentioned before too, and maybe you can go a little bit more into this. If you can explain, the city got new staff, and as they were reviewing the numbers, they realized this shortfall. And so if you can go into that a little bit, Chris.
Sure, no problem. As I mentioned, back in 2021, the city issued a loan to this district, but that was after in 2020, the Department of Public Works had a handful of people, new staff come on board, and that was assigned to the LLMD program. And in the operational and financial review of these districts, just for future feasibility and projecting out 5 years, that's when we found this funding shortfall. And it was brought to council shortly thereafter. And in fiscal year 21-22, I don't remember the exact month. I believe it was in April or May, mid-year sometime in 2021, a loan was issued to this district to cover that shortfall.
Yeah. So, Diane, I think what in all, if the rate would have been going up, right, with CPI, it might not be exactly where you are now, but it would definitely be higher. So that big jump was because of these reasons.
Okay, and I guess I would argue that you've actually just made my point for me, in that mine went from 300 to 1,000, and the overall cost went from 300,000 to $1 million. Okay, so exact same percentage, which to me says that the businesses that have come in are not paying their reasonable percentage more, and the general use fund is not paying its share, its greater share, as it seems like it should be to me, because if mine has gone up exactly as much as the cost has gone up, then there are not new contributions considering all of the use that's going on Hilborn Road now that wasn't happening when this assessment was created at $300 per household.
I would just like to clarify that it's not the costs that were stuck at $300,000. It's the assessment revenue that was stuck at $300,000. The costs have actually been increasing over time. So in fiscal year 18-19, it was at about $370,000. In fiscal year 19-20, overall costs were about $450,000. 2021, it was $580,000. 2021 to 2022, and this year is kind of anomalous because we reduced services at one point, then we got the loan and we increased services, so it's not a good representation. Except the budget now for fiscal year 22-23 is about $700,000. So the costs have been increasing, and that's where I mentioned we're dipping into our reserves to be able to pay for that, and then we also got the loan to be able to pay for that over the last couple of years. So those have been increasing. Additionally, the commercial properties actually have had a CPI increase, whereas the residential properties haven't had a CPI increase over the years. So they were paying into it and they were increasing at least some of the years. I'm not sure if it happened every single year for the past 30 years, but the commercial properties that were paying into it did see an annual increase from time to time over the last couple decades.
Thank you, Chris. All right, so I know that we did have some people drop off the call, and we do have about 12 minutes left of this meeting. And so if you do have a question, I ask that you raise your hand now. I see Carol's hand still up. Carol, is that up from before, or do you have another question?
Well, I can probably answer that previous meeting attendant, and I will say that the city has to be absolutely neutral, that I do not. And Chris will tell you that I have been kind of on this since December of 2020. And Joe Bisbee and myself and June Johnson in Rolling Hills have been just asking and asking and asking for 12 months and we have gotten every question answered. So may I say three things, and it will probably answer a few of the questions the previous speaker just asked. So one, the general fund, the new budget says 123 for the first year, 1,000. The old was 35,000. And that's, more than triple. The other thing is, if you went back to that slide, because everyone was yelling about Hilborn, it says that 55% of the Hilborn is pass-through, and for the landscaping, not so much the lighting, because that's a whole different formula, as we have found out in our many meetings and discussions. So really, that was a win. So that's why the city, has ponied up, just as much or more than some of the other. Two, all properties are not equal. And I'll tell you, I live on Sanctuary, and that is a road that gets a lot of maintenance, and it has a lot of green belts. And mine, went up $500, which is triple. And then there's another street up that doesn't border Sanctuary. It's a big loop, and there's doubled, little more than doubled. So yes, it depends on the factors that Sarah and Michelle explained. Some households, and I'm sorry you happen to be one, went up even more, than others. And the businesses certainly, and maybe you can show again, Michelle, the map that you can click on different people and see who went up and where they live, and the businesses, and the apartment building certainly is going up quite a bit. So, I mean,
Sure.
We have asked and asked. Now, the other couple of things is, remember, the assessment as it is $330,000, but we have to pay off $410,000 over 5 years, and $80,000 was taken out of this year's budget to pay for the whole engineering report. So when you only are taking in $300,000, when you take $80,000, one year, and then you start taking 80,000 for the next 5 years, that doesn't leave you an awful lot. And even looking at the budget that's coming up, it's $155,000 just to water. And we all know our water bills have all gone up. And Ryan, good thing you're not Mike, because I'd ask him. But that's, if that helps at all, maybe show, yeah, thank you, she's doing it. And I can say that, so I did. Bye.
Thank you, Carol. And Carol, did you have a question as well?
I've asked them all, so I'm
Okay.
listening.
Great, wonderful, thank you. All right, so we have, Diane, I saw that you unmuted yourself. Did you have another question?
I just wanted to thank Carol because that actually does answer my question quite a bit more. That was what I was wondering. And it sounds like the other people, whatever the businesses and the general use, I can't remember the names of things, but anyway, it sounds like other things are covering a lot more of the cost on Hillborn, which was my concern. So thank you for clarifying that, Carol. I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Carol.
You're hired, Carol.
Will that come out of the budget?
Oh, you said you were going to volunteer, right, Carol?
That depends how many wineries you can get to, donate. Okay.
Wonderful. All right, so we have about 8 minutes left. If there are no additional questions, we will ask that you can go ahead and start signing off. But if you do have questions, please feel free. We will definitely stay on until 8 o'clock. So if you do have those additional questions, we do recommend that you do stay and ask them. But also, I did want to put this back up. I'm so sorry. Let's see.
There is one comment up there. Who? You says you're recording and someone asked, who sees this transcript? You're going to post it, right?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Carol. We are going to post this on CivicMic.com. This entire meeting will be posted there sometime next week. So thank you, Carol. And if you do have any further questions, you can reach us at contact@civicmic.com or civicmic.com/Fairfield. There is an ask questions on the website, and that will direct you to us. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming today. We really appreciate your time. Again, if you, sign off of this meeting and all of your questions come to you, we are here for you, and we will are open to answering any questions that you have. Paul, Chris, anybody from the city, would you like to say any final words?
Ditto what Michelle said. Thanks for joining us tonight. There's going to be more information that's going to roll out through posts over the next several weeks, so look out for that. Sounds like everybody's on CivicMic already, so that's great. Ask your neighbors and friends to make sure they're signed on so they can get the same information. And then, of course, as Carol said, we need to stay neutral, but you guys don't have to as residents. And so if you're for it or against it, then you can do that on your own. That's for you to decide. But yeah, thanks for joining us, and look out for more updates coming out here in the next few weeks.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody.